Well, good day, everybody. Welcome to episode 006 of CodeWhile. Today is August 9th, 2024. Thanks for joining. In episode 003, a JSON.stringify function was implemented as a quick and dirty hack for any JavaScript implementations that don't have such implementation already available. And then in episode 005, it was extended to include the commonly found indentation support. Well, one of the benefits to having indentation available for JSON.stringify is that it makes it nice to read for humans, for people. It gives you a little bit of a sort of a tree-like view for the JSON that you're examining. Well, this episode's going to attempt to implement another feature for people to enjoy, and that's to be able to show an array of arrays in a sort of a tabular format as JSON. So let's get to it here. Here I've included a diff, and we can review just the new parts. This is the diff from the JSON implementation from episode 005. Now, this new tabular stringification support doesn't depend on the indentation from episode 005. It only depends on episode 003, but just for the sake of completeness, I'm going to continue on from episode 005. So what have we got here? We've got a new _.padding function, and there's a couple of variables, I and result. And then for this line here, assigning an empty string to the result variable is the goal of this code, while we iterate over the count number of times. We'll add a space to that result variable, and we'll return the result. So what are we doing here? We're returning count many spaces altogether, and that's called padding. All right, how about down here? All right, so here's a new _.stringifyTable function. And what have we got here? Column ij, lines, max column width, new column, new row, new table, padding, and row. Okay. I want this function to accept a table argument, and I want that table to be an array of arrays. The outer array will be for row elements, and each one of those rows should also be an array that contains cell elements for each column and row. So the first thing I do here is I check to make sure that the table is an instance of an array. If it's not, throw an error. If the table length is 0, let's do a quick return, a special case where we just return an empty array as the JSON result. And then now some initializations, max column width, an empty array, same with new table, an empty array. Now this I is going to iterate over the rows by looking at the table.length, which is the count of rows. For each iteration, we will go fetch the row from the table, and that row itself should be an array, so we check if it is an array, and if it isn't, we will throw an error about that. And then we're making a new row because we're going to do some transformations. So this new row is going to be a counterpart to row, but it's going to be a transformed counterpart. And also with the new table, we're going to push in the new rows for the new table. So we push in the new row, which is just an empty array for now. And then J is going to iterate over the number of cells or columns in that row that we just fetched. And I'm going to be able to work with new row down here, but I've pushed it onto the table already. So it's going to be in the right position that it needs to be in the new table. So we fetch the column from the existing row that was passed to the function, and then we make a new column, which is just going to be underscore dot stringify of the column. And that's just making JSON out of what's found in that column. So the original cell is going to have some kind of JavaScript value, and this is going to be the JSON of that value. So then what's next here? For the new row, we push that new column, so it's building its way up sort of from left to right, so to speak. And at the same time, while we're here in this loop, we're going to be tracking the maximum found width of each cell, because it would be nice to present the end result in a tabular format with some justification to line things up. So I'm checking here to find out if the max column width array has as many elements as we're at with our jth iteration. But if they're equal, then that means we need to extend the max column width to be at least as long as the row that we're currently processing. And so that's what this push will do here. It'll push a 0 value as a default for the maximum observed width of the current column. And then immediately after that, I'll check if the length of the JSON string for the new column is greater than the max column width for this column. And if it is, we'll reset the max column width to be the length of this newest, longest observed JSON string. All right, so what was that all? That was for all of the rows here. Okay, after all that's done here, make a new empty array for the lines variable, and then we'll iterate over all of the rows, the new rows in the new table, and for each one we're going to build up a line. So we fetch the new row again. If the new row.length equals 0, we're going to special case this line and just return a little bit of indentation, 2 spaces of indentation, and an empty array without anything in the middle of it. And we'll continue on to the next row after that. Otherwise, we start with an empty line and we're going to add some string pieces to it. So we start out by setting padding to 0, and we'll find out a bit about what's going on there. Then we iterate over each of the columns or cells inside of the new row. We'll fetch that column as the jth element of the new row. And then what are we doing here? If we're finally doing something interesting, line.push _.padding with the padding that we just assigned most recently, and then plus new column. Well, what does all this mean? All right, _.padding with padding. So the first time we do this, padding is going to be 0, and so padding is going to return an empty string with no spaces, because 0 means no spaces. And so it'll be 0 spaces and then the JSON for the column. And then after that, we take a look at the we take a look at the maximum column width for this column, and it's either going to be the same as or greater than the length of the JSON that we just output. So whatever the difference is here between the width that this column should be and how much JSON we just output, we're going to set that into the padding variable for the next iteration. And why is that? So if there's another column next, it's going to be prepended with the padding of that would extend the previous column out to the column width that it should have been. So that's the rationale behind that. The padding gets prepended to the next cell value. And so we go through all of those different cells or columns, and then finally we push the entire line to the lines array. We start out with a little bit of indentation, 2 spaces again, then a left square bracket, a space, and then we join all of the different pieces that we just produced with that previous loop with a comma and a space, and then finally with a final space and the closing right square bracket for the row. So that's what we do for each line. Finally, once we've built up all of the lines, all of the rows, the final end result is going to be some JSON, and it's going to have a left square bracket, a new line, and then all of those lines joined with a comma and new line combination, and then all of that followed by a new line and a right square bracket. Okay, so that should do the trick. And then I've also added this new stringifyTable function as a return value for the utility object. And so that's the diff. Then, for the sake of completeness, all of that notQuiteJSON is what its name was. All of that notQuiteJSON is now included here in the next section. And then scroll down a little bit here, past all of it. Here we can see the new stuff there. And then what have I got down here? Finally, all of this was evaluated and gave an object, and it was now available as window.notQuiteJSON. So I've just tried to exercise a couple of those error cases here. So the first thing I did was I called stringifyTable with a null value. And surely enough, here is the error. Table is not an array. So that tells us that it should be an array. Next, I'm just about to try this stringifyTable with an array, but without an array of arrays. I'll make the first value in the array a null value. Let's find out what happens here if I click on the eval button. Okay, so this gave me the error, each row must be an array. All right, that's expected. All right, the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to try some legitimate JSON. That's an array of arrays. Here it is here. Let's take a look. Oops. I'll scroll up a little more slowly perhaps. Oh, I can't have to use the arrow keys. All right. So here I'm making a test table, and it is an array that spans from here to here, and each one of its elements is also an array. This first one I've got 3 elements, a string, and an object. Here I've got just 2 strings, and then in the third row I've got 2 strings followed by an array with 2 elements in it. Okay, and then what does all that do? Okay, then I'm going to try to exercise window.notQuiteJSON.stringifyTable with that test array. Let's find out what happens here. I'll click on this, click on eval. All right, what did we get? We got the left and right square bracket. We got the nice indentation here. And here we see that the third element for the 2 rows that have 3 elements are all justified the same way. This was the longest value in the second position, second column, and so everything else was shorter than that, but the padding was computed to span, prepend before the third element what needed to be padded from the second column here. So that looks great. That seems to do the trick. So I hope you enjoyed that. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Take care.